Of Nightline, I am Jonathan Richley, your guest host, and I am a very excited individual right now. Although I do have a lot of diverse interests, one of them certainly is politics. And as we are looking at what's happening across our province the past couple of months, we've had four crossings and 5 in total in the past 12 months. And I got to thinking, golly gee, there's got to be other more civilized political models out there that we can look at that don't have such interesting games of crossing the floor. So joining us tonight, all the way from the Northwest Territories, is the Chief Electoral Officer of the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories, Mr. David Brock. Thank you for calling in tonight.
Good evening, Jonathan. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you.
My tremendous pleasure. Now, for those of you out there who are not as familiar with the Northwest Territories as Mr. David Brock is, I myself know a little bit about it, but not as much as someone who lives there. There are 19 electoral districts in the territory, and they include areas like Fort Simpson and Hay River North, and I think the Inuvik, Boot Lake, and the Twin Lakes as well. You have a diverse and large, huge tracts of land, as the Monty Python guys would say, but you have 19 electoral districts to cover that, and yet not one political party.
It's a fascinating region of the country to have the opportunity to serve as Chief Electoral Officer. You're right, we're running all the way from the northern boundaries of Saskatchewan and Alberta all the way up to the Arctic Ocean, and then to the right and left of us, east-west, is Nunavut and Yukon. So, as you articulated, quite a diverse place as well with 11 official languages. But you're right, in all that we have 19 electoral districts, so 19 sitting members of the Legislative Assembly, one returned from each electoral district, and not a single registered political party represented in our Legislative Assembly.
Very interesting. David, I didn't know that there were 11 official languages in the Northwest Territories. Does that mean that you have to have your documents printed in all 11 languages for them to be accepted at the legislative level?
We certainly have all of our documents available in all official languages. We won't necessarily produce them up front like that, but one of the things we've tried to do here in the electoral office is to make sure that particularly the primary information that we have for voters as well as for our candidates is in as many of those, if not all, of the official languages at the time of a general election. Okay,
and each electoral district has approximately 2,000 to 2,500 people living within. Is that right?
But that's approximately correct, yes.
Okay.
We have about 27,000 electors in total, say.
Very good.
So quite a range.
Yes, quite a range indeed. Now, David, if you could take us through the steps, what was the impetus to have a nonpartisan House as opposed to a party system such as we have here in Newfoundland and Labrador?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jonathan, and I think it's important to clarify that it was perhaps more of an historical process as opposed to a distinct decision at a certain place in time.
Very good.
Most of your listeners will know that the Northwest Territories used to be even larger and used to include what are now the provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan,
right,
which were created in 1905. So before 1905, we actually had full representative government all across what was then the much larger Northwest Territories. From 1905 to until 1951, we had appointed representatives making decisions here. And then from the period 1951 through until 1975, there was a mixture of appointed members and elected members. And finally, we got to the point in 1975 where we had a fully elected territorial council. And then about 10 years later, in the mid-'80s, the Commissioner and Executive Council, the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories, was withdrawn from the decision-making body and became more of akin to a Lieutenant Governor or Governor General, which everyone's familiar with in Newfoundland and across the country. So it's been a slow evolution here in the Northwest Territories, really over the second half of the 20th century, from an appointed decision-making body to full responsible government.
Fascinating. And your government, of course, there is at least one senator from the Northwest Territories division within the House of Commons in Ottawa, and if I remember correctly, that would be the Liberal Nick Sibbitzin, I think it is, right?
That's correct. We each of the three territories have one senator, as well as one member of Parliament in the House of Commons, and Nick Sibbitzin is a Liberal and is the senator for the Northwest Territories. Is also a former member of the the Territorial Legislative Assembly, as is the senator for what is now Nunavut, Mr. Dennis Patterson.
Okay. And Mr. Sibitston, thank you for helping me with the pronunciation of names, of course, is no longer a Liberal senator, but he's an independent senator. So much like your government in the territories, there is shall we say, a neutral senator representing your territory as well. However, we all know that the ideologies are maintained within your belief systems, and I would guess that despite you having a non-party House in the Northwest Territories, there must be some sort of ideological leanings that shine through. How do you deal with them?
Well, yeah, that's an important clarification. I must note that I've actually been out of the country for the past couple of months, so there's been much happening in Canadian politics, which I'm just catching up on now, and one being the change to at least the Liberal Party of Canada in the Senate, and I'm sure some other changes in the Canadian Senate. But with respect to your question, yes, so we don't currently have any registered political parties that are represented in the Legislative Assembly. In fact, we don't have any legal mechanism to register political parties. But I think it's fair to say that just because one isn't a member of a political party doesn't mean that they don't have principles and beliefs, and I think that's really what ideology is about. Perhaps, and this is a little bit of speculation on my part, but perhaps it may be a more fluid system here because, of course, we know that one of the dynamics of political parties can be at times an element of party discipline, and absent that mechanism of discipline, members in our Legislative Assembly, each individual member may be more free to take a particular decision or a particular position on a given issue, but that's not to say, again, that those decisions aren't being made out of a system of beliefs and principles. Okay,
that makes a lot of sense. May I ask, and for a lot of us who don't know, is your government based on consensus or is it majority voting?
Well, yeah, that's a very important question and speaks to exactly how the system runs here. So maybe I can just give a bit of a general outline. Of course, here in the Northwest Territories, we hold general elections just like in Newfoundland and every other province and territories. But following that, of course, often on the night of the general election, residents of Newfoundland will have a good idea of who will be the next government. Of course, that's not 100% of the time, but usually. Here in the Northwest Territories, we don't know. So when the general election is completed, we know who will be the 19 members representing our electoral districts in the Legislative Assembly. But it's not until a couple of weeks later when there's a territorial leadership meeting that's held. And during that territorial leadership meeting, among the 19 members, it's those 19 members who vote to decide who will be the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly first, then the selection of a Premier, and then the selection of an additional 6 cabinet ministers. And so for those people at home who are doing the math, they'll recognize that 6 plus 1, the Premier and cabinet, are always in a minority position. And so those 7 individuals who form the government always need to convince 2 or 3 members from the other side to vote with them in order to pass any piece of legislation.
Right.
Add on to that kind of the culture of consensus government, in part because of the way the committee system works. There's certainly, I think it's fair to say, a political culture that encourages the government to bring as many regular members on side to support whatever policy position that the government is advancing, and to have a smoother advancement of that total governing system over the course of their 4 years in government. And that, just to close, is in part reflected in how the mandate is set. And again, comparing it to Newfoundland or any of the provinces that have party systems,
right.
You know that if for example, a Conservative government is elected, then it's the Conservative electoral platform that will drive the mandate of the government. Here, the mandate is also decided in parallel after the general election and is crafted by all 19 members of the Legislative Assembly, what we call our caucus.
Wow. Wow, I find it fascinating, and I know that a lot of other countries study your political model quite closely, as much as the European Union studies the federal model of Canada and how we all seemingly get along, despite the fact that Quebec hates everybody and everybody hates Quebec, if you will. It's fascinating that your political model is studied. I have to ask, do governments come up and visit you physically in the Northwest Territories to sit in your Legislative Assembly, or is it mostly done via conferencing or that sort of method of communication? Any idea?
No, I do, and I certainly I can give one example. I know last summer I had a long conversation with a individual who was representing the Speaker of the Assembly in New Zealand, and he was here in particular. He was studying Westminster systems all across the world to try and bring some lessons back for some constitutional talks in New Zealand, and one of the places he came to was Northwest Territories. Because of the consensus model and a way that adopts many of the principles of the Westminster system, but of course, as you've noted, is slightly different in terms of implementation and its function. And that's quite common for us. So again, although we are a geographically large jurisdiction, but only 42,000 residents, we tend to attract perhaps more attention nationally and internationally because of the way that we do business here politically.
Just brilliant. David Brock, we're going to have to let you go because we have to go to the break, but thank you very much for taking the time tonight to give us a taste of what it is up north and to give us a little drop of what I think is a wisdom and an interesting way to run a government. And hopefully either the political communications directors or the actual members of the House of Assembly were listening in tonight and got a piece of this knowledge as well. Thanks so much, and well, I guess it's good afternoon up in Northwest Territories, isn't it?
Just before dinner time here. Always a pleasure to speak with anybody in Newfoundland, and thanks for the opportunity this evening.
My pleasure, sir. Take care, and we'll speak again, I hope.
Thanks, John. Bye-bye.
Good night. All right, folks. Boy, should have asked him what he was going to have for dinner.